Welcome to PhotoActive, a podcast about photography and technology. I'm Kirk McElhearn.
And I'm Jeff Carlson.
You can find show notes, including any photos we discuss in this episode, at photoactive.co. That's photoactive.co. Congratulations, Jeff.
Congratulations. Wait, what are we congratulating on?
We've reached episode number 200.
Yay, that's what I thought it was. 200.
I remember when we hit episode 100, you reminded me that I had told you, because you had never done a podcast, or you'd never co-hosted a podcast
Correct.
before, you'd been a guest, and you reminded me that I had said something to, you'll know that you've become good at podcasting when you reach episode 100.
Yes. And now that we're at 200, how did everything go so terribly wrong? No. We're much better than we used to be.
I actually did a count recently. I've hosted or co-hosted well over 1,000 episodes of various podcasts.
Good heavens.
Including a couple that are defunct, that went on for quite a long time. But we are here 7.5 years after we started in May 2018.
Wow.
And I was just thinking before the show, so we're going to talk a little bit about photography and cameras and what we've learned over the years. And I was just thinking how much has changed in photography since 2018. How much has changed in terms of cameras, and particularly iPhone cameras, because around that time I had an iPhone 8 Plus, which did you have? The 8, the 8 Plus?
I probably had the 8. I probably had the 8 because that's before the Pros came in.
Right.
Yeah,
but that was the year of the
8.
iPhone X, wasn't it? That the 8 and the X came out in the same year.
No, I think the X came out the next year. It's all the mists of time.
It's all in the mists of time.
Okay, well then I had the X because I wanted to get like the most.
You did have an X,
most advanced one. Yeah.
But I mean, a lot has changed. But I want to open by saying, and this just happened 2 days ago. Martin Parr passed away, age 73, and I just want to talk a little bit about what he did for photography. Now, I met Martin a couple of times, and I had my portrait shot by him in 2019. I interviewed him once for Popular Photography. I'll put a link in the show notes. And he was a fascinating guy. I'll also put a link in the show notes to an article in The Guardian today where a lot of photographers and artists are talking about him and talking about the relationship with him. And I was thinking a lot about, I mean, they're saying that he was Britain's favorite photographer. And I don't think most British people really know who any photographer is. But he had a look and a style that was unique. And I was thinking today, and I'm probably not inventing anything, but what he did is he made, air quotes, art photos with a snapshot aesthetic. Bright colors, direct flash, scenes often of people on holiday, on vacation, at beaches or at races, or he did a book about tennis recently where he shot people in Wimbledon, people doing leisure activities for the most part. And it made me think that people can identify with that type of photography because they've been in that sort of situation where they want to capture the vacation or the Saturday at the beach or the races or whatever. And that speaks a lot more to most people than the majority of art photography.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there's also that sense of when you think of photography, capital P photography, it's very good studio portraits. You've got big dramatic landscapes. You've got a lot of like street photography, black and white street photography. And this didn't quite fit into those. This was more of these are the kind of pictures that you see. These are the kind of scenes that you see every day that you probably just look past or maybe you note briefly. And he had that ability to see that thing, see that there was more to it, and then take a picture based on that. So I don't know, like elevating the mundane perhaps, but it was very much you could do this too. There's a little bit of street photography in that, yes, you can go out and shoot street photography. And as we have learned in experience and research, street photography done well is very, very difficult. And I think his stuff kind of falls into that same bucket. It's like, well, yeah, you can go out and shoot some people who are on a beach, but it was his eye and the things that he deliberately picked out that elevated it beyond just, hey, I'm walking around with my iPhone.
Well, not an iPhone. He generally used a Canon camera.
No,
and famously,
but if I had an iPhone, yeah.
Right. And famously shot in automatic mode, didn't care about, getting the shallow depth of field. That was totally anathema to his type of photography. Another thing to note is he created this photography foundation in Bristol, which is the city he lived in. And I think he first set it up in 2017 or 2018. And it might have just been during COVID when they started having a photography contest for members. And so you would send in, I think, up to 3 photos, and he would choose one from each person. And then we would do a 2-hour Zoom where he would go through all the photos and talk about them. And he wasn't critiquing them to say this is a crappy photo, but he was pointing out what people did that was good. And most of the people were trying to emulate his style, but not all. Some people were doing landscapes and portraits, etc. But he was very generous about that. The way he would talk about these, it would be a fun 2 hours to listen to him talking about all the different photos.
Yeah.
So Martin will be missed. His foundation will live on. When I visited in, I want to say 2018, 2019, it had pretty much just been set up in a section of Bristol that was an old factory area, and the area is called the Paint Works, and they were rebuilding all these factories and bringing in all these artistic things, and I think there might be theaters and musical venues and stuff, and it's pretty lively. It's considered to be one of the main locations for photographic exhibits and a huge library of photo books in the UK. So if you're ever in Bristol in the UK, drop in.
Cool. I also want to say that it's interesting to see, and not just because of you pointing me to an article, but it seemed like there were a lot of other photographers who went out of their way to say how much they admired him or enjoyed working with him. It wasn't just that, oh, this artist died. It was a lot of people, I don't know. It seemed beyond I feel like I should issue a statement because I am also an artist type of response. Like people really genuinely connected with him. So that's always nice. That's something to aspire to.
On Facebook, Michael Kenna posted something early today. And Michael Kenna's photography is the exact opposite of Martin Parr. It's black and white minimalist, whereas Martin Parr is bright color maximalist. And he said, like so many other photography enthusiasts, I will always be indebted to the ubiquitous and larger than life Martin Parr. His wonderful 1982 book of photographs, Bad Weather, profoundly inspired and influenced my own work in those years. And he goes on, offer condolences, etc. That would have probably been when Parr was still shooting in black and white. And he made the shift around that time into color. I'm going to put a photo in the show notes of a book of his that I bought. And this is the typical Martin Parr humor. This book is called Remote Scottish Postboxes. And he drove around Scotland with his wife, and they found these post boxes, mailboxes, out in the middle of nowhere. It was the first book of landscapes that he ever shot, in the sense that there's no people. It's just the post boxes.
Yeah.
It's a small handmade book. There's like 100 or 200 copies, and I got the signed edition. And it's a really charming bit of humor showing these post boxes against the landscapes behind them. It's really a clever idea.
That's really awesome.
So I have a photo that I took of the book, which includes a little postcard signed by him, which says, "Wish you were here," in front of a post box in this weird stone thing next to a field. Interesting guy. Anyway, 200 episodes. We decided that what we wanted to talk about was what we've learned or what we've changed, in particular the cameras we've used and the gear we've used. Do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Using the techniques that we've discussed on the podcast before, using the metadata in the Photos app I used in Lightroom Classic, trying to find the images that I had taken with like a handful of my sort of main cameras. And actually, none of these are iPhone photos. We probably could have done that. Maybe we'll do that as like a follow-up, like maybe a grouping of iPhone photos we shot. But this is just on regular cameras, I should
Real
say.
cameras.
Real cameras. Let's antagonize people right away. Real cameras. And the first one I'm going to show is – and a reminder, this will be in the show notes at photoactive.co. But the first camera where I was sort of serious about actually being a photographer came very late. If you have listened to some of our early episodes, you know that I came late to photography. I basically went on a trip to South Africa, and I realized I was going to go on safari and I should probably get a camera that wasn't just a little point and shoot that I'd had for years. And so this image, this is a photo of some pews in a cathedral. And this was taken with a Canon PowerShot S2IS. So still kind of point and shoot, but still it does have manual controls. I got it mostly because it's a fixed lens, but it had a really good zoom to it. I don't even know what the range was, but probably at least like, I don't know, 150, 200, maybe 250 millimeter equivalent on a tiny little sensor. But this was the first time that I was being more deliberate about actually taking photos. And this was this cathedral. There's light streaming through the windows. We went in, I think this was kind of early morning. We ended up in a little town in Spain where we had a layover. And it just struck me to see like how light and shadow was working, and started activating that part of my brain that said, okay, you're not just being a travelogue documenting the things that you see, looking for something that has, I don't know, like more of an artsy quality without sounding artsy. I mean, when I say artsy already, that sounds terrible, but you know what I mean? Like that deliberate, look at how the light is hitting this. So that's my first one. And you?
So I had shot photography back in the 80s, in the 70s, actually, when I was in high school. I did a photography shop class where I learned how to develop black and white, and I shot a little bit in the 80s. And then when I moved to France, I didn't have a camera for a long time. In the early 2000s, I bought some sort of cheap HP digital camera, which we posted a couple of photos over the years of, photos from the Alps. But when I came to the UK, I bought a Olympus EM10, which was a pretty plasticky Olympus mirrorless camera, and it was not very expensive, and it had a pancake lens, and it was my real introduction to digital photography, modern digital photography. So I'm going to choose a photo which at the time I thought this was actually quite nice, and I was getting into the whole idea of color photos, and it kind of opened the door to me to get back into taking pictures with intention. And of course, it would be the first of many cameras that I've owned over the years. And we're not going to go through every camera, but if I look at my list, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Fujifilm cameras, 2 Olympus and 2 Leica in 13 years since I've been in the UK.
Okay.
That's almost a camera a year. And there were some overlaps. I had the Olympus Pen F at the same time that I had the Fujifilm X100F. And then I sold the Pen F, and then I went to another Fujifilm, which I guess would have been the X Pro 2, and et cetera, et cetera. So we're not going to go through everything. But this photo of this flower, so this is flowers in a vase. It was sitting out outside of my house, and it was one of those things I walk by and I say, oh, this looks interesting. And I figured I had to shoot this. Now, of course, I could fill up the show notes with photos of Titus and Rosalind. I'll maybe add 1 or 2, because back then there were photos of Titus and Rosalind, because, you want to take photos of something that's actually moving.
Yes.
But this was one of the first that I spent time editing, trying to figure out the best way to make it look good. And there's some shallow depth of field, and it's some flowers that are kind of starting to fade, and it's real pastel colors, and I still like it, even though I think technically it's not a great photo, but it was one of the first photos that I really tried to I want to say I tried to edit it to create
Mm,
something that captured what I saw, which wasn't exactly what was in the result in the digital photo.
that's a really nice way of putting that. Okay. For me, my next one is going to be probably the thing that set me on this terrible journey. So after going to Africa and taking some good pictures and all of that, I was faced with the question of, all right, do I want to get serious about this? Should I get a DSLR? And I had several friends who were like, yes, you absolutely should. So what I ended up getting was a Nikon D80, which was a very, I want to say, like, it wasn't just solidly consumer. It was like maybe a step up in terms of the capabilities that it had. But it was basically like my first introduction to, okay, now we got removable lenses. We've got reckoning with the exposure triangle and having lots of control and not having a camera that's going to do all the thinking for me. Like it could. It had an auto mode, of course, but this was where I was really starting to think about, all right, how can I be more deliberate about not just what I'm seeing, but what I'm shooting? And there were a bunch of pictures that I chose that could have been good for this. And the one that I ended up with is one that I converted to black and white. And it shows a woman in a coffee shop. There's a coffee shop in downtown Seattle that has this amazing, like, old brick wall. And there's light coming through. And just the expression on her face, she is like she's clearly waiting for somebody. It looks like maybe they've gone to the bathroom, or there's a coat on the chair across from her and a briefcase, and they're having coffee. But she just had this expression on her face. And I was taking the picture mostly because the light was great, and I just liked the composition of it. And I managed to snap it when, like, she has this very pensive look. Her lips are a little pursed. And what stands out about this for me is this is when I really started taking my camera everywhere. Now, I realized with DSLR, it wasn't a big hulking professional Nikon, but they were all kind of big cameras. So it was a commitment to grab that. I think I had a 18 to 135 millimeter lens, so that was also kind of big and chunky. And it was a commitment to, I'm going to carry this around as much as I can and take pictures where I see them, because you never know when that might happen. And that was a big step. That wasn't just, I'm going to take my camera off the shelf and take it on vacation or take it on a weekend away. This was, I'm going to look for pictures wherever I am.
And that's when you live in a city and you have the option to look for pictures wherever you are, you get a lot of opportunities. So for me, living in a rural area, the next picture I'm going to choose is from 2018, September 2018. So shortly after we'd started the podcast. And this was shot with an X Pro 2. And this is me walking around because I'm not in a city and I'm in a rural area. And this was a photo I took. If you look at the bottom of the photo, you can see the stubble that's remaining from the wheat that had just been harvested. This was in September. And I was out one evening and there was this really dramatic sky around these two trees. And this was a raw photo, even though if I look at the top, if I zoom in, it looks very grainy and it almost makes me think it's the Acros film simulation, but it's not. It's a raw photo. And I not really looking too much at how I edit it. I do see a fair number of edits to, exposure, highlights, contrast, et cetera, et cetera. And there was this period when I was just walking around the farm a lot and trying to capture things that stood out. And this kind of awakened my eye to what you can see in a rural area. Unlike what you can see in a city where there's always things going on, whereas here, it's not often things going on. Although around harvest time, it can get interesting.
Well, I'm sure somebody would say there's always something going on depending on where you look, but I know what you mean. Also, this also shows that you also did not grow up in a rural area. You grew up in New York City. So
I grew up in the suburbs of New York and Queens. So
there is definitely stuff going out.
Semi-rural in the sense that there were tree-lined streets. Pretty large park near where I lived, but still city. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, the next one. We said that we're not going to do every single camera, but I have to throw this in.
I think we should just go through and each pick a handful of photos that
Yeah.
stand out. And
Yeah. So after I had the Nikon D80, I was looking for something else, and I got the Nikon D90, which is not a huge improvement, or sorry, not a huge increase, but this one shot video. Now, I'm not going to share a video because I ended up not doing very much video. Video was sort of my justification for, since I am now a recent father, I'll want to shoot video with this, and it ended up being just a little bit more of a hassle to shoot video with this compared to having it on a phone. What I have instead, my D90 is where I went on my first photo workshop and got all sorts of different types of shots. And the photo that I have here is we went to some caves in Oregon, and the group leader had some steel wool. And when you light steel wool on fire and put it at the end of a string and spin it around, it sets off all sorts of sparks. Now, it's best to do this in some place like you're in a cave where things are not flammable. Like, don't do this out in a dry field. Oh my God, no.
Yeah.
But when you set this up and you set a long exposure, it makes these very cool lights trails that come off from the center of the ring. So this was an example of not just taking my photography more seriously, because I went on this workshop, and a lot of the shots from this period are very deliberate, lots of landscape stuff, but also just something different that I had never done or considered before.
That's definitely a spectacular photo.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so summer of 2019, this was the Fujifilm X-T3. And so I still had the X100F, and I was switching between them. And this photo was shot with the 50 millimeter f2. So the 50 millimeter is what, 75 millimeter equivalent, right?
Mm-hmm.
I spent a lot of the summer taking close-up photos of flowers. And I took hundreds of photos, and I've saved about 30 of them. And I did them all in color and black and white. And this wasn't a macro lens. This was just the standard 50 millimeter, but it was relatively close. This is a drying sunflower, a small sunflower that's drying. And you can see the hairs on the leaves that stand out. And this wasn't anything fancy like focus stacking. I just shot this at f16 in order to get as much as possible in focus. You see a little bit of fading on the stem of the flower. And I really enjoyed doing this. But this also made me realize that there are things in photography that you can get into, and you can really explore them, and then you get to a point where you don't want to do them anymore. And I know there are people who make their living out of shooting close-up of flowers, or, insects or moss, and really focus on something forever for their entire career. And I couldn't do that, but I did go through this summer trying with all different flowers, most of which were growing in the fields around me. We had a bunch of dahlias in the garden, different kinds of roses, lilies, et cetera, et cetera. And every time I found an interesting flower, I would take it into my office and set up some light and shoot it. And it was really interesting because I was really inspired at the time by Robert Mapplethorpe's book of flower photos, in which he had this wonderful natural light in his studio, and he had these flowers that were beautiful. And all of mine is natural light as well. It was by a window on my desk. And I just really enjoyed discovering lighting flowers. And like some people might do this with the actual human models, but human models aren't patient and they're expensive unless you know a whole lot of people. So this was an interesting summer. Maybe one day I'll get back to doing flowers some other summer. I've got an interesting, a few dozen nice photos here. Mm-hmm. But again, I think the most interesting thing was looking at the way the light illuminates something like this, which has so many asperities on it.
Yeah. I think that's also a really good lesson in that it's good to take something and explore it. And if you realize, you know what, ultimately this is not for me, but I gave it a try, and that's okay.
I'm not sure. I think it's not for me. It's just that I don't want to spend my life doing it, but I learned a lot from doing it. It was a real learning experience of light, of using depth of field, because I was on a tripod, so I could go really slow and use depth of field instead of trying to play around with focus stacking.
Yeah.
But it was really about lighting, getting the angle of the light just right for the flowers.
Well, and also having the control of, you're not dependent upon all the other environmental factors. You can kind of cut out a lot of those difficulties and just focus on what you wanted to focus on, which is also a great exercise. Cool. I am going to jump past a couple. I switched to mirrorless with a Fujifilm X-T1. In between, I shot with a Canon PowerShot G12 as like a little compact camera that actually I took one of my favorite pictures with that, my favorite pictures ever. But I'm going to jump to, now that I've mentioned it, darn it.
We've only got a half hour, Jeff. So
I know.
We're already near the end. And you're editing this time, so
okay.
We don't.
So I'm going to double up. I'm just going to mention this really quickly, and I'm sure this has been in the show before. But I took this picture of a siphon coffee brewer that is illuminated just the one coffee that was being made, actually my coffee. And this was also, and I know we've mentioned this in the show, one of the best coffees I had in my life at a Blue Bottle in San Francisco. But anyway, so this was shot with the with the Canon PowerShot G12. But the one that I really want to show, and will admit that I was just cheating a little bit, was honestly, I think one of my favorite landscape photos, and this was shot with my Fuji X-T3, which I still have. That's still my main camera. And this was a shot. We were camping with a bunch of people, and I saw that the sunset looked promising, so I basically excused myself, and I set up my tripod in this little area where the water – So this was on Puget Sound, and the water kind of flowed through some rocks into a little rocky pool area. And I managed to find a spot that was just right where the sun is coming down between some rocks. There is a bit of illumination coming through the water where it breaks to come into the rock area. And then I did a long exposure to get some nice softness to that water motion. And I mean, I don't know if this is a superior photo, but I love the way it turned out. I love the way I edited it. And there are times when you're taking photos and it just feels like when you're there and when you're editing later that everything kind of came together. And it has that satisfaction for me when I look at this every time. I was like, oh, that was a good experience, and that was a good photo. I like that.
Yep. Okay. I have to, since we're running out of time, I want to get one photo with my Leica Q2 monochrome and another with my Q3. So this one with my Leica Q2 monochrome, this is walking around the farm and finding something interesting. Do you know what it is if you look at it? I've given you a clue because I said farm.
I want to say maybe this is like looking inside a grain silo, maybe?
Not a silo. So when they harvest the wheat here, they dump the grain in this big farm building, and it has slats on the side. And I walked by one day, and it was about 3:00 in the afternoon, I think, and the sun was coming in through the slats, and the way the sun illuminates the grain, but also the fold in the grain makes it look like there's this ladder of light going up toward the distance. And this was just a wonderful abstract find that I chanced upon.
That's gorgeous. Okay, and your other one? Because I got two, so you need to get two.
Okay, so I'm going to do a Q3 photo. And this is actually, I think this was the first photo I shot with my Leica Q3. I can't not have a photo of Titus in this selection.
Good man.
And this when I looked at this photo after I shot it, and I zoomed in and I zoomed in, I was amazed at the sharpness and the quality of the lens, the way it falls off in the back. And this was shot at f 5.6. The tree is a couple of feet away and the wall is more. So the fall off in here is really quite interesting. This was ISO 100, 1/80th of a second. He was just sitting there peaceful, didn't see my camera. And the naturalness of the color and the sharpness of the lens when you zoom in and look at his hairs and the hair around his ears, I just found amazing. And I really enjoyed what this camera could do from that point on.
What a great introduction, especially when you buy a new camera and you're like, is this really going to make things better? And then you take one.
Yeah.
You're like, yes,
Yep.
yes. Also, I think maybe our listeners would have revolted if we had not included any cat pictures. So,
I know.
You're doing a public
and
service.
I'm wondering if I need to finish with a picture of Rosalind, but go ahead.
Well, are we wrapped up or do we want to do one more?
Well, I wouldn't mind doing one more because this was shot shortly after the Titus picture. Should I do it now? This is one of the best pictures I've ever gotten of either of my cats.
Oh, by all means, yes.
This was me down on the grass, getting to the level of the cat, and the expression on her face and the fall off in the depth of field is just wonderful. You see the fall off in front of the grass, right in front of the lens. The face is perfectly focused, and the way the background is slightly blurred. Again, this is the quality of this lens. This was shot at f4, but the lighting, the grass, the expression on Rosalind's face, I think is just wonderful.
And is that her natural eye color, or is that also the green of the grass reflected?
That's another thing. That is her natural eye color, but the way it comes out through the photo, it gets highlighted by the fact that there's green grass around it.
Yeah, well, there's like a little highlight at the top that looks like it might be a reflection of the sky, or maybe
it's a reflection of the sky behind me. Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yep. Okay, no more cat photos. Over to you.
Okay, so then my last one, I'm going to sort of go back in time. I skipped over this, but I'll share it anyway. So I mentioned that I had a Fuji X-T1, which was my first Fuji, my first mirrorless. And this is something that just in going through my images, I don't think this is my best photo. I don't think this is my best X-T1 photo, but for some reason it just popped out at me today. And this was just me trying to play with composition. It's a black and white photo. I'm sort of at the bottom of some rocks, and it looks like I'm looking up some steep rocks. It's not quite the case. It's more of a gentle slope, but there's rocks that go up to the left, and there's a tree kind of coming out of it. There was some water reflected, and then my family at sort of distant silhouettes in the background. And I just liked the perspective of this. I took this using a 12 millimeter lens. So like, I think it's roughly like 18 millimeters.
18, yeah.
Yeah. Especially when I converted it to black and white, I just liked the way it turned out. I like the motion of it. So it was a complete, gosh, I wonder what this would look like. I have this ultra wide lens on my camera. What happens if? And I like the way it turned out.
It's very cinematic.
Yeah.
It looks like a shot from a Western or something. It definitely does. That's wonderful. I just want to sum up without another photo and just quickly say that over the years I've learned, and I've discussed this in a couple of other episodes, that simple is better. And I've gone from owning Fujifilm cameras with a whole bunch of lens to being to fixed lens cameras. And I think, obviously it depends on what you shoot, but I think this learning experience of going through different lenses, buy a lens. Do you use it much? No, sell it. Buy another lens. Do you use it a lot? Yes, keep it, that sort of thing. And like discovering in the Fujifilm range, the two different 35 millimeter lenses, the f2 which is very good, and the f1.4, which is an amazing lens. But then giving that all up and obviously spending a fair amount of money on the Leica. But when I sold all my Fujifilm gear, the Leica didn't cost that much, so it balances. And I think the learning experiences that I've had is you can do more with less. And if you stop worrying about the gear, you can take more interesting photos.
That's a really good point. I think for me, looking at these especially, is that if you were to look at any of these photos, I don't think there's anything particularly about them that says, I needed this particular gear to get this shot. So, you know, like I mentioned, my current camera is still a Fuji X-T3, which is now, 3 or 4 years old. And, you know, it's still working just fine. The only times that I get frustrated with it is I wish it had faster autofocus when I'm shooting portraits, but not enough. Like, I don't do that enough to justify getting a brand new camera. Now, I might investigate like maybe a Sony body or something next, but I'm not in a hurry to do that. And so none of these photos are, gosh, I really need to have the latest, fastest camera in order to make better photos. They're all just, look, you can make great photos with just about anything that you have. And it's just a matter of seeing and being open to what a scene presents to you. And as long as you have a camera to capture it, you can do it.
And this even goes for an iPhone or anything that has a lens. Obviously, when I look back at some of my old iPhone photos, they're terrible, iPhone 4 and 5 and 6, and the photos were really crappy. The early photos, the lighting, it wasn't good in low light. The autofocus wasn't good. I mean, we've made a lot of progress in these years, and that's what's really interesting to see. So that's 200 episodes. We'll have another 100 episodes in, let's see, 4 years, I guess, because we do roughly 26 a year, and we do skip a week every now and then because of, you know, work and life and stuff. But 7.5 years. I want to thank you for the experience, and let's get on to episode 201.
I completely agree. And I want to thank you for suggesting this in the very first place. And I honestly, you keep saying 7.5 years, and I'm like, no, that can't be right. But yes.
Right?
Yes, it is. And
time has been going really fast.
Time has been going really fast. And also a huge thank you from both of us to everybody who's listening who makes this possible. As we mentioned before, go to the website. You can send us email through there. There's a link to send us messages. We've been getting email from people. And also we have a Facebook group that doesn't get a whole lot of traffic. We'd love a little bit more interaction, but that's where you'll find updates and things like that. So
if you want to see the passage of time, Jeff, go back to the first episode with the photo of your daughter who is pretty soon going off to college.
See, here's the thing. When I was going through all these pictures, there were a bunch like with the power shot. I was like, oh, there's my child as a baby and then as a 1-year-old. And I had to exercise considerable mental strength to like not just sit there and go through, oh, look at all the pictures. No. I have to stay on task.
Okay, until next time. Take care.
Until next time.
Thanks for listening to PhotoActive. You can find show notes, including any photos we discuss in this episode, at photoactive.co. That's photoactive.co. We couldn't afford the M. You can join our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/photoactivecast. That's PhotoActiveCast in one word. You can subscribe to PhotoActive in your favorite podcast app or on Apple Podcasts. See the links on our website. And think about leaving us a rating or review in iTunes or in your podcast app.